Sure. Right on. I'm Alex Seropian. I've been in the video game business for about 30 years. I founded three studios, Bungie, Wideload, Industrial Toys. I've worked at three large publicly traded video game businesses, Disney, Microsoft, and Electronic Arts. And I'm currently the host of the Fourth Curtain podcast, and working on some other various projects that are top secret.
So, as you mentioned, you created several companies from Bungie to Wideload to Industrial Toys. And what we can see is that each of these companies were acquired. Bungie by Microsoft, Wideload by Disney, Industrial Toys by EA. So I was curious to know if it was like the end game or the end goal for any smaller company in the video game market to be acquired by a bigger one.
Um, you know, I, That's a really good question, and I don't know what most companies' aspirations are. Companies are usually started by a couple of people. So they're entrepreneurs, and they want to start a business, and they want to start a business because a business generates money. So most people get into business to make money. Um, it's not always the case. Some people get into business to enable a creative passion, and I think probably in a video game business that happens a little bit more than not. But this kind of goes back to the question you were asking before about, like, if somebody that doesn't really know business, how should they get their game made? Sometimes the right answer is to go, join a company, that and work your way up until you're the game director. That sometimes is the right answer. But when people start a business, they either to enable this activity, to make something they think the world needs, or to make money. And that either goes forever or there's an exit. And the exit is getting bought or going out of business, or going public. So there's a few ways for the story to unfold. It could persist forever, it could go public, it could get bought, or it can go out of business. And most people don't want their company to go out of business. And going on forever that's a challenge. I think it's a real mental challenge. I think it's a rare breed that's able to run that race that long. If outsized success comes, it becomes easier. But like I was saying before, running a business is often a journey that's filled with both triumph and struggle, and that's just mentally challenging to do forever. So if you take those two outliers off the table, like companies going out of business or it's going to go forever, then it sort of leaves going public or getting acquired. And going public is a really big deal. A company has to get to a certain scale to be able to enable that, and the job really changes. Getting bought, getting acquired is often a really good outcome that can enable, like, companies go through these chapters, these growth stages. Getting acquired often is a way to accelerate the next step, and for the founders to be able to take a breath from that crazy race, and to make some money. So in the case of Bungie, it was Jason and I were looking at what Microsoft was doing, and it was very clear to us, it was very clear to me, that this was an opportunity for us to go from this kind of scrappy independent company that was pretty successful, making really good stuff, go from that to getting on the biggest stage with the biggest company with the biggest marketing budget. And because because a perfect storm brewed, that was actually the outcome, and that's super rare. And I've got no delusions that any of that was, none of that was easy. And super thankful for the outcome that we had there. And same with Wideload Industrial Toys. They were both opportunities that were similar to that. Just the most recent one, going from being independent maker of free to play for mobile in a ocean that was getting more and more competitive. Joining forces with EA was a way for us to kind of ratchet up to the next level. So do most companies look at getting bought? I don't know. I don't know, but if you think about the variety of outcomes that are possible, getting acquired is often the one that makes the is often the best case for an entrepreneur. Certainly better than going out of business.
Yeah, I can totally imagine, like, definitely. So, actually, speaking of your companies, in 2006, you gave GDC talk where you shared your way of working at Wideload, and it was mainly a studio focused on the game design and project management aspect of the game, where you would externalize most of the production to external partner. And we are in 2023 now, and I wanted to know if, like, what was your point of view after all this year about this way of producing game? Like, I'm not sure if the question is clear enough, so tell me if it needs some precision. I would gladly have them.
Yeah, yeah. No, I understand the question. So here's it's actually I think it's actually it's a very good question. It's a very interesting question because at the time when we started Wide Load, nobody was doing production that way, and the reason why we started that way was because of my experience at Microsoft. Um, like the 3 years I was at Microsoft were the years that the Xbox came out and the Microsoft Game Studios was born, and a lot of projects were started. Not all of them got to the finish line, and because my boss at the time, Ed Freeze, invited me and the other studio heads to have visibility into the slate, all the games that were getting made. I met a lot of these studios, and I met the producers at Microsoft working on them, and I saw the path, the journey that each of these games took, and I saw some common challenges that these teams had where they went from a game concept with a few people to a deal with Microsoft, which involved funding. So they grew a challenging deadline. So it's got to be done for the launch, or you got to be done for this quarter, or there's a movie. You didn't have so much in the movie category, but and so a crunch, big crunch. And then either the game came out, or in some cases it didn't come out because Microsoft was placing a lot of bets, and some of them they were like, this one isn't working, or we tried 3 of these and we're just going to go with this one, whatever. um, Sometimes it was the developer was behind, sometimes it was Microsoft didn't exactly know what they wanted, um, sometimes whatever, and I saw all of that happen, and I realized that this was a this was not a good business model for an independent developer, where a life cycle of a project was small to big to small. If you get a project canceled and you've got 50 people on staff and okay, time to prototype something new, you don't want to, you don't, it's not good to be feeding 50 people then, it's hard to stay in business that way. So that was very formative to me, seeing that when I started Wide Load. I asked myself, how do other creative businesses solve this problem? Because this can't be the only place where this happens. And it turns out film and television production have been building against this challenge for decades. And so that was really the inspiration behind this core team approach, where the core team is big enough to do that conceptual and prototyping work and will be consistent throughout the entire thing, and we'll just do all the projects that way. And when and so I'm just describing the model that you were asking me about, and then when we would go into production, we would contractors, other studios, etc., would help us deliver all the work. It worked. I mean, we made our first game that way, and it was profitable from the first day it came out, and we continued operating that way through the acquisition by Disney and the completion of Guilty Party, which I think was probably the best game that we did at that studio, and was also really successful. So it did work, and what we have today, if you're like, I didn't let go of that. You know, industrial toys operated that way. Industrial toys operated that way when we were inside of Electronic Arts. A lot of studios at Electronic Arts actually already operate that way. A lot of studios in the industry already operate that way. And today we call it co-development. Um, and if you look at, you know, we were just talking to Max Max's studio is kind of on the flip side of that. When a team like the Call of Duty team or the Halo team or the, you know, the Doom team are like, hey, we're building this thing and we need to scale, but we don't want to hire another 100 people. We can do co-development with Max's studio, and that's a double win.
Yeah, that's exactly why I wish to have you both on this episode. Like, with your experience, do you feel like this way of producing games help to reduce the cost? Like, is it cheaper to externalize the asset production and only focus your studio on the game design and the project management aspect?
Yeah, I mean, that is how a lot of the industry works. It's scalable too. So sometimes it's a core team. Sometimes there's a mainline team, you know, which is a little larger. They're making, you know, maybe they're making the campaign, or maybe they're making the multiplayer, and they're co-developing for the other part. Um, and that happens more and more today. And as the world gets smaller and smaller, you know, like the internet allowed us to collaborate with teams all over the world. And you know, when the pandemic happened and we all started working remotely, it was not just the internet, but the tools that have sprung up that have allowed just any team to work remotely to be even more effective at doing co-development. Um, and you know, it has. I think, you know, there some people are a little worried that jobs will get lost because, you know, jobs will go somewhere else to a cheaper location. But on the flip side, I think we're getting a lot more diversity of talent. So it's not just, you know, Americans making games for the world or whatever. You know, there's development teams all over. And I think what we're about to see happen in Africa is really fascinating, where the technology is catching up, and we're starting to see game development studios get started in on the African continent. And I think we're gonna see yet another center of creativity contributing to our industry, which you don't see in other businesses, you know.
Yeah, the African market is growing fast, and they have the ability to maybe not reproduce some of the mistake than the US or the Occident did in this domain. I'm actually quite surprised that you get this vision as well, because like I don't know why, but I thought that the US wasn't really looking outside of their border for this kind of thing, at least in the video game industries.
Well, I mean, I look at it this way. It's like I am very bullish on the game industry because it continues to the player base continues to expand. You know, it wasn't that long ago where, you know, well, I mean, whatever. When Halo came out, you would look at where people were playing the game, and it's where the Xbox was, which was the US and the UK. And when mobile came out, it was like, oh my gosh, you know, it was like Asia, way more, you know. And today you look at, there's more gamers in India than anywhere. And tomorrow, you know, you look at Brazil and you look at Africa, and it's so global. And it's not just where people are playing, it's where people are making as well. And that is, I think, just gonna like another step change of how, like, where this industry goes. It's pretty exciting, I think.
Speaking of new market, it's a good transition to move on from Wideload and talk about industrial toys, which was there more focused on the mobile gaming. If I'm not mistaken, you took about 2.5 years to create your first game. And I was curious if you felt like it was maybe a bit too long for a mobile game, and if you would do things differently if you had to do it once again.
Um, well, all right. So that there's there's a lot to unpack in that question. Yes, it was a long time. I think it was a particularly no. I mean, can you hear my dog? It's okay. All right. There's probably somebody outside. He's excited. Um, but yes, 2.5 years, a long time for a mobile game. Maybe not today, but back then, yes. Uh, for our first game, double yes. For our first game, where there were so many things were that we hadn't done yet, triple yes. Um, Today, though, I mean, I think if you were to go off and go, all right, I've got a market segment or a game idea here that I think is a winner, uh, and it's mobile, and I'm going to go and compete with the top 100. 2 years is not. I don't think that'd be out of line if you're talking about kind of AAA quality mobile game. That said, it's really hard to sort of get the that's really hard to do. It's really hard to do, and it's really hard to sort of get the investment conviction behind delivering that. I mean, and that's exactly what we went through, at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, when at EA, and we were kind of looking at the bar, to hit to be competitive with mobile FPS, and the time and the investment to get there, and whether it made sense, and ultimately a giant big company with seemingly all the resources in the world decided it's not. We don't want to do that. We want to treat mobile like, it's another platform for people to play the one game. We don't need to make something different over here. So I guess, and the answer to your question is like, was that too long? Yeah, I would say back then it was too long. Today, I might even say it might not even be long enough. It really depends, you know.
Yeah, I see. Oh, and by the way, like I hope you didn't feel offended by me asking this question. It was not at all in a negative way.
Oh, no, 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 don't. We're all learning machines here, right? So like what we do along the way, if we're not learning from it, then then or whatever, we should be learning from it. So it's all good.
If I remember correctly, your first game at Industrial Toys, it was a free to play, right?
Yes, it was free to play.
Yeah, asking, as in your podcast, The Fourth Curtain, your co host Aaron said something about your game missing some hooks for the player. And hooks, as a gameplay mechanic, are often seen as like dark patterns made to trick the players into spending more time and money into a game. But it feels like that in the mobile industry, unless you do like a traditional game, you cannot really do and compete without them. So my question was, do you feel like hooks are a necessary evil, or can we design ethical free to play with a fair monetization as of today?
Uh, it, it's a really good question. I mean, if you go back all the way to the beginning of the game industry, like not all the way to the beginning, but to the early days, like the early days of the PC game business, we started with shareware. Shareware was the original free to play. You could download or you can get the first level, few levels for free. It was the demo, and if you liked it, then you gave some money and you got more. And then it evolved to DLC, and those were all transactional business models of I'm going to pay for something that I want. You gave me something for free first, but I'm paying as I go, and I think that seems totally fine to me. On the other end of the spectrum, you could get some fairly opaque and usury systems that manipulate player behavior and change the rules of engagement along the way that you know incentivize people to pay in situations that don't really seem fair to me. And so that's a spectrum. Is it possible to do free to play in an ethical way? Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I think the bigger, the companies are sort of learning that, and ultimately you have to treat your players uh, well and respect your players and give them value if you want them to come back. So I, I, you know, maybe it's a little virtuous to think that the market will learn.
Yeah, it's kind of a broad question, which probably cannot be answered in a few minutes. And well, I hope you don't feel like it's a trap question because it isn't in any means.
No, I don't think it's a trick question. And it's my honest answer is I do think it's there. It is a spectrum. There's no, the business model of paid download is fairly straightforward. You pay a price, you download a thing. Uh, the business model of free to play is there's 1,000 different ways that works. Some of them are ethical, some of them are not.
So, could we resume this by saying it is the intention behind a design and a design strategy which make it ethical or not at all?
Yeah, I mean, you can ask the same question about like Facebook. Is Facebook an ethical platform? Like how they treat your data, how they treat people's data, and how they monetize it. I think a lot of people, myself included, decided they didn't want to be part of that ecosystem. Um, and there's different platforms that work different ways. So it is it is a challenge, especially as technology gets more sophisticated and the introduction of AI and all of that. It is I don't know if like consumers will be able to keep up with the technology to sort of police companies to doing the right thing, because the technology changes so fast and it can be so opaque, and it's like people don't even know what's going on. um how is the market going to police itself with the dollars? That was really the hope of capitalism, was like, people will vote with their money, and if you're doing something good, well, you'll make money, and if you're doing something bad, well, then you'll go out of business. um, but I don't know if that really is I think that's kind of an idealistic view. And I'm not saying I don't believe in capitalism. I do, but um, I think it's going to get a little tricky here before it gets better, especially with AI. Yeah, it's a good question.
Oh, I think we don't have much time left. Like, how much do you have on your side?
Uh, I could go 10 minutes over.
So, maybe a last question before talking about your podcast, The Fourth Curtain. So, recently, Industrial Toys, which was acquired by EA to work on the Battlefield mobile, was closed. As the studio founder, I wondered how you felt about it and if it affected your morale and your ambition for your next project.
Um, yeah. So I mean, I'll be honest. That really sucked. I mean, we we spent 10 years building that business, 6 years independently, um, and the reason we did that deal was to elevate the business, to get access to capital, to get access to markets that we couldn't access on our own, and IP as well, to help accelerate interest in our games, because free to play is all about acquiring customers, building that community. And we spent quite a bit of time going after that goal, with Battlefield. And in the course of the last 12 months, just a lot of things didn't go the way. Saying sometimes this happens, a lot of things didn't go right. Battlefield 2042 came out, and it was fans didn't really like it. EA did a deal with Tencent for their other mobile shooter, Apex, and that came out and kind of underperformed. Apple changed the privacy rules on their platform, so things got quite a bit more expensive. So just over the course of 12 months, like a bunch of things happened that just we had no control over, and it was what the market, we on us to navigate those challenges, and we just were not able to thread that needle in a way that we thought would work for our players, for the studio, and for EA. So it was, nobody wanted that outcome, least of all myself. But I mean, those things happen, and you know, absolutely no ill will. I have a lot of respect for the folks that are running the business at EA. You know, they're making really, really hard choices, and still figuring out a way to thrive in what has become a very competitive business. And for me personally, you know, I went through a lot of you know, questioning and emotions, because we had a pretty sizable team, and a lot of my best friends, you know, in that studio, and in a lot of ways I felt like I let them down. But on the flip side, I mean, I think you could probably tell I am an entrepreneur at heart. I do value my independence, and I love to build things. So, you know, 6 months out, I kind of am looking back at that experience, you know, remembering the good parts and the motivation to go and try and do some good, try to give something back. And that's really the whole motivation behind the podcast was, you know, I've gotten to meet so many amazing people in this industry. Maybe there's something that I can do to kind of connect that with giving something back to the community, you know, the folks that are coming up today. You know, I used to teach at DePaul University and Art Center here in LA, and you know, podcasting is not teaching, but it is really sharing my experience and helping other people share theirs. So I don't think I would have been able to do that if we didn't have that the unfortunate outcome there, and I have a few other things that I'm starting up as well. So, you know, I think your question was, how did that affect me personally? It was a very, very challenging outcome with a lot of emotion around it, but I'm pretty confident in a little bit it will have enabled some good things to happen. So, and I know a lot of folks on the team are off to like really exciting things too. So I'm very, very excited for all of them.
Game